What's up everybody, man back, welcome to a brand new video, and today we will be re-reviewing Godzilla Minus One and discussing everything we learned from the re-release of the film this November. Thank you guys all for tuning in. I can't wait to do another Godzilla Minus One review. I've done so many by this point, but I'll never get sick of it. I love this movie. I'll never stop loving talking about this movie. And thank you guys for tuning in. It's been a while since I've been able to do a video, so I appreciate you guys checking this out. The re-release for Godzilla Minus One kicked off on October 31st here in the United States and was extended through mid-November of 2024 in order to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Godzilla and also the first anniversary of Godzilla Minus One. The re-release had kind of some misinformation about it. Originally, it was announced that there would be 15 minutes of bonus material attached to the film. I saw a lot of people misunderstand and think it was extended. It was an extended cut of the movie, extended by 15 minutes, and that's not the case. While the movie was extended through mid-November, I do believe it's finally left all of the straggling theaters it was still in, so if you didn't get to see it, allow me to run you through it. The movie began with an altered version of the VFX breakdown, which was released for Godzilla Minus One ahead of the Oscars in order to basically plead Godzilla Minus One's case on why it should win the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. It goes into detail about how much they accomplished on such a low budget, all of the constraints they were up against, and all of the things they had to overcome, and it shows a lot of the techniques they used in order to create the film they did. There's actually a lot of really amazing stuff in there, and I'm gonna go really in depth with that featurette in a follow-up Godzilla video that I'm gonna do here in the next couple days or weeks. But for now, sticking to the version that was attached to the re-release, it was mostly the same, but it was slightly different. It's mostly focused on the film's limited budget, but some of the effects they spotlight are either different from the original ones they spotlighted or they're explained differently. Additionally, the biggest change was that there was new B-roll featuring some Godzilla action figures. We then transitioned into an interview with director Takashi Yamazaki and visual effects director Kyoko Shibuya. Not only do they introduce the movie, but Yamazaki goes on to explain that the featurette that had just played was actually the version shared with Oscar voters back at the beginning of the year. Then it's business as usual, and you are treated to either Godzilla Minus One or Godzilla Minus Color, depending on which version of the film you bought tickets to. I personally saw Godzilla Minus One in color twice, and I didn't get time to go to the Minus Color re-release. And I just gotta say, this movie is fantastic. It continues to hold up, and I continue to be so in love with it every single time I see it. Every time I watch the movie, I fall in love with new and small details, and there's so much that I'm still learning about how the movie was made, about how the story is told, and about little nuances throughout that make it so rewarding to rewatch over and over again for me. I'm so in love with the characters, with the world, the music, the whole thing. The movie works really well. Most importantly, I continue to be astounded by the wonderful sound design and how impactful and powerful it is to hear in theaters, and how you just don't get that experience when you're watching the movie at home. Seeing Godzilla Minus One is kind of like going back home at this point. It's become an enormous comfort movie for me, and I just can't get enough of it. So it was wonderful to rewatch. And while I can rewatch it at home anytime I want, and I've rewatched it a couple of times, it isn't the same not being able to see it in theaters. It's just so cozy, and I love it. If it was still in theaters, I'd still be going. After the film, we then returned to the interview with Yamazaki and Shibuya. They shared their thoughts on the filmmaking process and how they persevered through a lower budget, and how a lot of the handcrafted elements actually helped to create a very special charm to this movie and help make it stand out from a lot of Hollywood pictures, and I couldn't agree more. They then talk about how much the Oscar win means to them and how exciting it was to win. They explain how it's a really big win, not just for them, not for their VFX team, not for their VFX company, but for all of Japan. They then talk about how their team was this very loose and relaxed and seemingly out of place team compared to all of the other Oscars contenders. Most interestingly, they reveal that they submitted the film to the Oscars without any build-up. There was no pre-reel that they submitted. There was no pre-build-up to the submission. They just did it without really any organization at all. In fact, they didn't even know if they had submitted it, or had rather submitted it properly, until they got the confirmation that it was in. They were wondering up until that day came if they had forgotten to send it. It turns out that their decision to send it in was a last-second decision done the day before the deadlines, because they truly did not think in any regard that they would win, so they didn't think it mattered. They then get into some of the behind-the-scenes details, and there was only two big reveals here. One of my favorites was that they explained that they had a rolling green screen on a rig that would roll around the set during production, because they couldn't afford green screens big enough to create the environments they wanted, so they'd have to roll one around during the shooting. It turns out that production was halted one one evening after the green screen rolled over Kyoko Shibuya's foot, breaking it, and so Yamazaki had to take her to the hospital. Following that, when they were on set together, he had to roll her around in her wheelchair. They then made some jokes about how that became part of the director's job and how his responsibility was to take care of his crew. Shibuya was on set so that she could help oversee the pre-process of the VFX, so that she could wrap her head around what was to come, and so that she could make suggestions on how things should be filmed to better help the post-production process. It just goes to show that these guys were like really aware of what they were doing and were thinking really far ahead. Very refreshing to hear. Shibuya then explains that Yamazaki's workflow is so different from every other director that she's worked with, but that she's really used to it after working with him for so many years and really likes it. They kind of explain in the pre-reel that Yamazaki's workflow is different because whereas a lot of VFX companies, you'll have somebody handling basic animations. That'll be passed on to somebody doing some texturing. That'll be passed on to somebody doing lighting. That'll be passed on to somebody doing environmental effects like smoke and sparks and other things. And it just goes layer by layer by layer by layer. Whereas Yamazaki's workflow is to give somebody a shot and the person handles every element within that shot. So the same person's handling all of the little things that go into the shot. That way when they present it to Yamazaki, he doesn't have to go through a whole chain of command if he wants to make adjustments. He just explains to the one person what's going on. The most interesting thing was when they discuss Godzilla's design. First of all, they talk about how they wanted this Godzilla to be very classic, going back to Godzilla's roots, and they wanted it to look like the classic Godzilla that we've all come to love. For Toho, and for many of us, that is the 90s Godzilla. And that's where this Godzilla's design started as well, and from there they took influence from different things like coral and trees and other parts of nature, in particular underwater nature. They were inspired by a lot of underwater ecosystems and the way different life grows down there. Godzilla's design in the movie is supposed to be layered, symbolizing his age and showing how overgrown he's become. Basically, the idea is that his scales are textured, like they're really layered. They built up layer by layer by layer, so it gives him a lot of bulk, it gives him a lot of weight and a lot of mass, and through that it shows his age, like the rings on a tree showing the age of the tree. That's Godzilla, that's his shoulder, that's the scales. Not only that, but they wanted to change the texture of Godzilla's skin. Obviously, in a lot of the Toho films, Godzilla has this very skin-like texture that's got these deep crevices carved into it. They wanted to change that, go with something a lot more like what you'd see with some underwater life, like the scales of a fish. And you can definitely see that on Godzilla. While there's some areas on Godzilla's arm where you get some of those classic Toho textures, Godzilla overall has a much more armored plated design that definitely does feel a lot more like something you'd see in the real world. And I like that. I like the thought that goes into it. Again, one of my favorite things about Godzilla Minus One is how much they play into the idea of Godzilla as a monster in the sea. And the fact that that really worked its way into the design, I think, is just fantastic. And that's really all you missed in the extended re-release of Godzilla Minus One. The movie wasn't extended, it just had some bonus features that you can't get anywhere else. And finally, to end it off here, I want to go back and give Godzilla Minus One the 10 out of 10 it deserves to say, for me, after 1 year of this movie being out, it has stood the test of time and it continues to get better on every rewatch. I've seen the movie over a dozen times and I still do not tire of it even a little bit. I gave the movie a 9 out of 10 when I originally reviewed it just because it didn't do anything that I couldn't see coming, and that it was a little safe and a little predictable in that it's so familiar to the rest of the Godzilla franchise, but over time I've really come to love that about the movie, and it really feels like it's an encapsulation of everything that's come before and everything that I love so dearly about Godzilla up until now. And I'm really happy that the movie did that. I'm really happy to celebrate that, and so I want to give the movie a proper 10 out of 10 after all of this time. So now everybody who was mad at me for giving it an incredible score originally, now you guys can be happy. I finally gave it the 10 out of 10 it deserves, and I'm right there with you. Thank you guys so much for watching. I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. It's through the support of the patrons on Patreon that I'm able to continue to make videos for you guys. If you want to support the Patreon, you can use the link in the description below where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time for the next one. D-Man out.